Get that man out of the cockpit before he kills us all!
Walter Keene shouted as the cabin lights flickered and every face turned toward the man in the gray hoodie. Marcus Reed, the black passenger from 6A, stood at the cockpit door while a Canadian military jet flashed outside the wing and alarms screamed behind him. Minutes earlier, they had asked him for proof. Now the captain had lost his voice, the first officer was shaking, and the plane was answering every command too late. Marcus turned once, calm enough to frighten them.
Then decide fast, because the airplane is already deciding for you.
90 minutes earlier, nobody on Flight 48 knew who he really was. Northern Crown Flight 418 had been in the air long enough for people to forget they were inside a machine. That was the trick of night flights. The engines became weather. The cabin lights faded into a soft blue wash. Windows turned black. Strangers stopped being strangers and became shapes under blankets, tilted heads, pale phone screens, hands resting near plastic cups. Outside, Canada stretched beneath them in darkness, cold and empty, a country of frozen lakes, sleeping towns, and cloud cover so thick it looked less like sky than a lid closing over the world. The flight had left Halifax late and was bound for Calgary, where his mother was recovering from heart surgery, cruising at 39,000 feet above the winter storms moving across Ontario. Somewhere behind first class, a nervous laugh rose, then disappeared under the steady roar of the engines. In seat 6A, Marcus Reed sat with his head leaned against the wall, eyes closed, one hand resting loosely over the pocket of his old gray hoodie. His parka lay across his lap, his snow boots were scuffed, and his face carried the calm of a man used to hiding what lived behind his eyes. To most people, he looked like a contractor flying home after a long job. Maybe a mechanic, maybe a driver, maybe nobody worth studying. That was how quickly the cabin had handled him. A glance, a decision, done. Then the speaker cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, just wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harold Mercer. The voice stopped for half a second, and that half second did more damage than the words. Conversations died, heads lifted. A glass paused halfway to someone's mouth. We are dealing with a technical situation that requires immediate assistance from anyone on board with military flight experience. If there is a former military pilot on this aircraft, especially someone trained in manual flight during systems failure, please notify a flight attendant at once. It would be the last complete announcement. Mercer managed before the weakness took the left side of his body completely. Silence dropped through the cabin so hard it felt physical. No music, no scrolling, no soft clink of ice. Only the low growl of the engines and the sudden knowledge that every person on that plane had become part of the same problem. A cup slipped from a tray table and rolled into the aisle. A woman pulled off her headphones with both hands. One phone lit up, then another, small frightened squares glowing in the dim cabin. Lead flight attendant Nadine Clark stepped out from the forward galley with the interphone still in her hand. Her uniform was neat, her dark hair was pinned tight, her face had the trained calm of someone who had smiled through delays, medical scares, and angry passengers who believed volume was a form of status. But her eyes had changed. Marcus saw that before anyone else did. Her mouth said procedure, her eyes said hurry. Across the aisle, Walter Keene leaned forward in his cashmere coat, jaw tight, silver watch flashing under the cabin light. What did he mean by military pilot? He asked, not to anyone in particular, but in the tone of a man who expected the world to answer him. No one did. Near the right side windows, a passenger gasped. Another leaned over. After the cockpit declared an emergency with air traffic control, a nearby Canadian military aircraft had been diverted from a training route to inspect the outside of Flight 418. Beyond the wingtip, far enough not to threaten them but close enough to be seen, a second aircraft moved through the night. Its lights pulsed red and white against the clouds. Sleek, controlled, military. A whisper traveled backward. There's a jet out there. Then another. Why is there a jet beside us? Nadine heard it and did not answer. That frightened people more than any answer could have. Marcus opened his eyes fully now. He did not look at the jet first. He listened to the engines, felt the faint, uneven tremor beneath his boots. Watched the way Nadine's fingers tightened around the interphone cord. Then he looked toward the cockpit door. He knew voices under pressure. He had heard them over Labrador ice, over Black Ocean, inside radios filled with static and men trying not to sound afraid. Captain Mercer's voice had not carried panic. Panic was messy. This was worse. This was control beginning to crack, one careful word at a time. Marcus sat still for 3 seconds, long enough for the cabin to search itself for the kind of man it expected. A gray-haired veteran, a uniformed officer, a white shirt with wings on the chest. Someone official, someone obvious. No one looked at him. Not really. And in that brief cold space between the captain's request and the cabin's disbelief, Marcus Reed understood two things at once. Something was seriously wrong with the aircraft, and the people around him were already looking past the one man who might understand why. Marcus did not stand right away. That was the part no one would understand later. They would say a man like him must have known instantly what to do. They would imagine courage as a switch, off, then on. But courage did not feel like that inside Marcus Reed. It felt like a door he had locked years ago, and now something on the other side had begun turning the handle. He looked down at his phone. The screen had woken when the captain's announcement shook the cabin, and his mother's last message still sat there, small and ordinary beneath the time. Come home safe. I will leave the porch light on. 7 words, no drama, no warning, just a mother's way of making distance survivable. Marcus stared at them until the letters blurred a little. Ruth Reed had always believed in porch lights. When Marcus left home, whether for basic training or northern exercises over black water and ice, she kept that light on as if it could argue with the sky. 6 years earlier, Marcus had walked out of a military briefing room in silence, after hearing the final report from a training accident over Labrador. The room had smelled of coffee, paper, and men trying to behave like grief was an administrative matter. Daniel Cross had not come back. Marcus had. No one said it that bluntly, but the truth sat in every chair. One aircraft returned, one did not. One mother would hear her son's voice again. One mother received a call after midnight and made a sound Marcus never forgot. It was not a scream. Screams had shape. This was something broken leaving a body before language could catch up. Since then, Marcus had hated late phone calls. He hated the way a ringing phone could make a room hold its breath. He hated the pause before a voice asked if someone was sitting down. People liked simple stories. They said he left the service because the accident scared him. That was almost right, and almost right was often how people made lies sound gentle. He left because he had seen what survival could cost the people around the survivor, and because his mother's hands had started shaking, the year he came home for good. The aircraft trembled again. Faint, like a thought passing through metal. Marcus lifted his eyes. Nadine Clark was moving down the aisle now, scanning faces. Not him. Not yet. Her eyes passed over him the way eyes had passed over him earlier at Halifax. The gate agent had watched his boarding pass scan green, then still smiled with doubt instead of welcome. "Sir, are you sure this is your boarding group?" she had asked. Polite voice, careful face. A question wrapped in procedure. Marcus had shown the screen again. Same seat, same fare, same right to stand where he was standing. Behind him, Walter Keene had stepped forward in his wool coat and polished shoes. His boarding pass beeped. "Enjoy your flight, mister." "Keene," the agent said, warm as morning. "No?" Second question. No pause. No need to prove he belonged to the same line Marcus had just been asked to justify. Marcus had not argued. He knew the cost of arguing small moments in public places. People called it attitude when you named what they were doing. They called it misunderstanding when they wanted to keep doing it. So he had nodded, walked onto the jet bridge, and carried the little wound with the rest of his luggage. Not anger, recognition. Cold, too familiar to surprise him. Now, at 39,000 feet, the same pattern moved through the cabin under a different kind of fear. Nadine's eyes searched for authority in the shapes she trusted. A gray head, a pressed collar. A man who looked like he had spent his life being believed. Marcus looked again at his mother's message, then turned the phone face down on his tray table. Outside the right windows, the military aircraft held its distance, lights pulsing through the cloud like a warning no one had translated yet. The radio voice from his old life seemed to rise beneath the engine noise. "Raven, do you copy? Raven, say status." Marcus closed his hand once, slowly, until the tremor in his fingers stopped. He had buried that name. He had buried the sky that came with it. But the captain's voice had found the grave. Nadine Clark moved down the aisle with the interphone pressed against her palm, not her ear. She had already heard enough from the cockpit. The captain had spoken once. Then the first officer had come on in a voice too tight to belong to a routine problem. Now she carried that tension with her, wrapped inside the neat Navy uniform, and the practiced calm passengers were trained to believe. Her face stayed composed. Her fingers did not. They were white around the black handset cord. "Any military flight experience?" she asked. "Any former pilots? Military aviation? Manual flight training?" Rose stared back at her. A woman clutched a paperback too tightly. A man in a business shirt shook his head too fast. Nadine kept walking. Her eyes worked faster than her voice. They moved over gray hair, straight backs, expensive coats, polished shoes. They stopped for half a beat on a man wearing a vintage pilot-style watch. They stopped longer on Walter Keene. Walter sat in 6C across the aisle from Marcus, shoulders squared under a dark cashmere coat, silver hair combed back, shoes shining even under the dim cabin lights. He looked like a man who had spent 68 years being invited into rooms before he had to ask. Nadine leaned toward him. "Sir, have you ever flown?" Walter blinked, almost offended by the pressure of the question. "No, not professionally." He said it like a correction, not an admission. Nadine nodded anyway, as if something about him had still been worth checking first. Marcus watched from the window seat, quietly. He watched her eyes pass over him the way the gate agents had passed over his boarding pass. A quick measurement, hoodie, old parka, snow boots, his dark skin under the soft blue cabin light. Not the answer. Not the picture. Nadine had already turned toward row 7 when Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt. The click was small. Too small for a cabin full of engine noise, yet it seemed to cut straight through the air. Nadine turned back. So did Walter. So did the woman across the aisle with the bent paperback. Marcus stood slowly, not to challenge the room, not to perform for it, but because standing too fast around frightened people made them invent reasons to fear you. He kept one hand open at his side. "I flew C-18s," he said. His voice was low, clear. 12 years. For 1 second, nothing moved. No relief came. The cabin looked at him the way people look at a locked door they were not sure should open. Nadine's eyes went first to his hoodie, then to the parka folded on his seat, then to his boots, last to his face. Marcus saw the order. He had spent his life seeing the order. "Do you have military identification?" she asked. Her tone was professional, but the question landed harder than professionalism could soften. "Not with me," Marcus said. "I left 6 years ago." Walter Keene leaned slightly into the aisle. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Certain men learn early that quiet doubt can travel farther than shouting. "We need someone official," he said, "not someone trying to be helpful." A few heads turned toward Marcus with new suspicion, relieved to have someone else name the discomfort for them. Near the window in row 5, a woman whispered, "He does not look like a fighter pilot." She said it softly, almost to herself. That made it worse. Soft words often reveal what loud words try to hide. Marcus heard it. Nadine heard it. Even Walter heard it, though his expression did not change. The aircraft gave a faint, sideways shudder, barely enough to move the hanging strap near the galley, but enough to remind every person there that the debate was happening inside a wounded machine. Nadine took one step closer. "Sir, I need you to understand the seriousness of what you're saying. I do. If you are mistaken, if you are exaggerating, if you only have limited experience, bringing you forward could make things worse." Marcus looked past her toward the cockpit door. "And if I am telling the truth, leaving me here could make things worse." Walter exhaled through his nose. "That sounds convenient." Marcus turned to him for the first time. Not sharply, not angrily, just fully. Walter's confidence thinned under the attention, though only at the edges. "Facts are often inconvenient," Marcus said. "That does not make them false." The woman with the paperback lowered her eyes. Nadine's jaw tightened, not with anger exactly, but with the strain of realizing this was no longer a simple search for help. It was a decision with moral weight. She had asked the cashmere coat first. She knew it, and shame moved under her skin before she could hide it. Marcus kept his voice even. "You do not have time to decide whether I look right. You need to know whether I am right." The sentence settled over the aisle. No one knew what to do with it. It did not accuse. It revealed. Nadine looked toward the cockpit, then back at Marcus. Behind that locked door were pilots, systems, alarms, and whatever truth had made a military jet appear outside their wing. In front of her stood a man without papers, without uniform, without the shape she had expected rescue to take. If he was lying, she could lead danger into the cockpit. If he was telling the truth, she had almost walked past their last chance. Nadine did not move. That was the first answer, though no one called it one. She stood in the aisle with Marcus Reed in front of her, Walter Keene watching from across the row, and a cabin full of frightened people waiting for someone else to decide what kind of man Marcus was allowed to be. The aircraft hummed beneath them, steady enough to pretend, uneven enough to punish every second they wasted. Nadine glanced toward the forward galley, then toward the cockpit door. The interphone in her hand felt heavier now. Not equipment, evidence. Walter shifted in his seat, his expression polished back into concern. "This is not the moment for experiments," he said. The words were clean, almost reasonable. That made them colder. Marcus looked at him. "No," he said. "It is the moment for facts." Walter gave a small laugh through his nose, not loud, not ugly in the way people could easily condemn. It was worse because it sounded civilized. "Then provide some." The cabin leaned into the sentence. A man in row 5 stopped breathing through his mouth. The woman who had whispered about Marcus not looking like a fighter pilot stared at the carpet as if the pattern in it had become important. Nadine felt the pressure tighten around her ribs. If she trusted Marcus and he failed, she would carry it forever. If she dismissed him and the cockpit had no one else, she might carry something worse. Marcus did not argue. He had learned long ago that arguing with suspicion often fed it. Suspicion wanted volume. It wanted sweat. It wanted him to become the shape it had already drawn. So he stood still, hands open, shoulders square, voice quiet enough to make everyone else hear themselves. "Ask me something that matters," he said. That was when Victor Shaw stood up from 7C. He did not rise like a savior. He rose slowly, with a stiff knee and one hand braced on the seat back, like a man tired of letting wrong things pass because correcting them cost energy. He was 67, broad through the chest, with gray stubble and eyes that had spent decades reading fear inside uniforms. "I worked Air Operations Liaison for 24 years, he said to Nadine. "Joint exercises, northern patrols, search coordination. I have heard enough real pilots under stress to know the difference." Nadine turned to him quickly. "Sir, please sit down. In a moment." Victor looked at Marcus. No softness, no rescue offered for free. "Aircraft? CF-18 Hornet. Where did you train?" "Bagotville first. Cold Lake for conversion and weapons work later." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Call sign," Marcus paused. Not because forgot, because the name still had ice on it. "Raven." Something in Victor's face changed, just a fraction. Walter frowned, annoyed by details he did not understand. Victor continued. "Manual control. Delayed response. First priorititude," Marcus said. "Always attitude first. Hydraulic pressure falling. Pilot gets scared and starts forcing inputs. What kills the aircraft? Over control. You ask twice before the airplane has answered once. So what do? Small input. Wait. Read the response. Use trim if it gives you anything. Manage thrust like a control surface if you have to. Keep speed above stall margin. Do not chase the nose. Do not fight the airplane just because fear wants motion." The words came without decoration. No performance. No hunger to be believed. Nadine felt that most of all. Men pretending often reached for drama. Marcus reached for sequence. Victor watched him for another second, then asked the last question more quietly. "If the pilot beside you is panicking." Marcus's eyes moved toward the cockpit door. "Shrink his world 10 seconds at a time, speed, attitude, descent. Nothing else exists until the next 10. Victor's mouth tightened. Not a smile. Recognition. He turned to Nadine. "He is real." The sentence moved through the cabin with less force than Walter's doubt, but more weight. No one cheered. Shame does not clap. It lowers eyes. Walter looked down at his own hands, suddenly interested in the pale lines across his knuckles. The woman near the window turned her face toward the darkness outside. Nadine swallowed once. She looked at Marcus again, and for the first time she seemed to see him in the correct order. Face first, man first, hoodie last. "Come with me," she said. Marcus nodded and stepped into the aisle. As he passed Walter, Walter opened his mouth, perhaps to soften what he had said, perhaps to protect his pride from the silence. Marcus did not give him the chance, not with cruelty, with urgency. He walked forward. Every row watched him now, some with hope, some with guilt, some with the desperate, selfish prayer that the man they had doubted might still save them anyway. At the cockpit door, Nadine stopped, entered the code, and spoke into the panel. "It's Nadine. I'm bringing him in." For 1 second there was only engine noise. Then the lock clicked. The door opened. A hard alarm spilled into the cabin, followed by a clipped voice from inside saying, "I can't hold this much longer." At that exact moment, the cabin lights flickered once, then steadied. Walter Keene shot to his feet, panic finally breaking through the polished control in his voice. "Get that man out of the cockpit before he kills us all." The aisle went silent. Marcus paused at the threshold, alarms screaming behind him, and turned just enough for the cabin to see his face. "Then decide fast," he said, "because the airplane is already deciding for you." Marcus stepped through, and the sound behind that door was not procedure. It was a fight being lost. Marcus stepped into the cockpit, and the cabin fear behind him became something sharper in front of him. The air smelled of hot metal, spilled coffee, tired electronics, and human panic held too tightly in a small space. Captain Harold Mercer sat in the left seat, tilted against the harness, as if the aircraft had pulled part of him away from himself. One side of his face had gone slack. His left hand lay near the armrest, useless and slightly curled. His eyes were open, angry, awake, trapped inside a body that would not obey. Owen had unlocked the cockpit for Dr. Lena minutes earlier, after Mercer's speech slurred and his left hand slipped uselessly from the controls. Dr. Lena Morrison knelt beside him with a medical kit open on the floor, 2 fingers pressed to his wrist. She looked up just long enough to understand Marcus was not crew. Then she said, "Possible stroke symptoms. He can hear us. He cannot fly." The captain's eyes shifted toward Marcus. Pride, fear, apology, all of it crowded there with nowhere to go. Marcus gave him one small nod, not comfort, respect. "You called for help," Marcus said. "That was command." A broken sound came from Mercer's throat, but no words. In the right seat, First Officer Owen Fraser gripped the controls with both hands. He was 31, pale under the cockpit lights, his white shirt damp at the collar, headset crooked over one ear. His eyes were fixed on the instruments, moving too fast, reading everything and trusting none of it. Training had put him in this chair. Reality was trying to remove him from it. Simulators did not smell like fear. Simulators did not carry 184 passengers and crew members behind a locked door. Owen looked at Marcus for half a second, and the old doubt came with him even here, even now. "You flew fighters," he said. "This is not a fighter." Marcus moved closer, careful not to crowd him. "No, it is slower, heavier, and full of people. That is why we do less, not more." Owen's jaw tightened. He wanted to reject that. He wanted rank, checklist, a captain's voice, something official enough to lean on. Instead, he had a man in a gray hoodie standing behind him, calm in a room where calm felt almost rude. The aircraft dipped before Owen could answer. Not much. Enough. The nose moved late, then corrected too far when Owen pulled back. "Easy," Marcus said. Owen snapped. "No," Marcus said. "You are scared. Scared, hands move too much." Owen froze for a fraction of a second, offended because it was true. Marcus looked over the panel. Autopilot disconnected. Hydraulic pressure dropping unevenly. Flight controls heavy, trim fighting them, then helping, then fighting again. Warnings glowed in red and amber across the panel like small fires no one could put out. The radio crackled. A voice from the military aircraft outside cut through the cockpit noise. "Northern Crown 418. Escort confirms visible fluid trail near left main gear housing." "Repeat, visible fluid trail, not vapor." Owen stared at the gauge. "So it is real." Marcus kept his eyes moving. "It is real." Nadine stood just inside the cockpit door, one hand gripping the frame, Her face changed when she heard that. Until then, part of her had still been hoping for a sensor error, a caution light, a story that sounded worse than it was. The truth gave her nothing soft to hold. Owen swallowed. Nearest field is Thunder Bay. Weather is bad. Wet snow. Crosswind. Runway is long enough, but braking could be ugly. Emergency crews? Marcus asked. Already rolling. Fuel? Enough. Not enough to wander around and think about our feelings. Marcus almost smiled. Almost. Good. Then we will not. Dr. Lena glanced up from the captain. Can you land this aircraft? Owen looked at Marcus as if he hated needing the answer. Marcus did not take the question from him. He nodded toward the first officer. He is in the seat. He lands it. I keep him ahead of the airplane. Owen's eyes widened. Marcus leaned closer, voice low. You fly. I keep the next 10 seconds from killing us. The aircraft shuddered again, harder this time, as if it had heard and objected. Owen's hands tightened. Marcus caught it instantly. Small input. Wait for the answer. Owen eased the control. Nothing happened. His shoulders rose. It is not responding. Then the nose moved, late and heavy, like a tired animal turning its head. Marcus pointed at the attitude indicator. There, it answered. Late is not never. Remember that. Owen breathed once through his nose. Too shallow. Marcus heard it. Again. Slower. Behind them, Captain Mercer's working hand twitched against the harness. His body could not answer the emergency, but his eyes stayed on Owen, fierce and pleading. Outside, the escort jet's lights slid through cloud and darkness. Inside, every warning seemed to grow louder. The aircraft was still flying, but each command took longer to become motion. A half second, then more, and in a damaged airplane, delay was not empty time. Delay was where fear learned to make mistakes. Nadine Clark came out of the cockpit, with the sound of alarms still clinging to her. For 3 steps she forgot how to breathe normally. The cabin looked the same as it had minutes earlier. Blue light, closed window shades on one side, blankets twisted over knees, cups in holders, faces turned toward her. But it was not the same cabin anymore. Before, they had been passengers. Now they were 184 passengers, and the crew waiting for instructions from a woman who had just seen the captain trapped inside his own body and a damaged airplane answering late. Nadine reached the forward galley and lifted the handset. Her fingers almost slipped on the plastic. She wiped her palm against her skirt, hated herself for needing to, then pressed the button. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nadine Clark, your lead flight attendant. We are preparing for an emergency landing in Thunder Bay. I need every passenger to listen carefully. The silence that followed was not obedience yet. It was shock, learning how to sit still. A man in row 2 whispered something into his phone and stopped when his voice broke. A woman across the aisle made a small sound, then covered her mouth as if the sound had betrayed her. Walter Keene stared straight ahead, his face stiff, his expensive coat suddenly useless against the cold entering the room from the inside. Nadine continued. She did not say everything would be fine. Fine was a lie, and lies made people careless. Fasten your seatbelt low and tight. Remove glasses. Put phones and loose objects away. Keep your shoes on, feet flat on the floor. When we give the brace command, heads down and stay down until we tell you to move. Her own voice surprised her. It sounded stronger than she felt. Maybe that was what training did. It gave fear a script before fear could become noise. A man in row 5 stood suddenly and reached for the overhead bin. My medication is up there. Nadine moved fast. Sir, sit down. I need it. Tell me where it is. Black pouch. Front pocket. His hand shook as if the air itself had turned electric. Nadine looked toward Victor Shaw, who had already unbuckled and stepped into the aisle with the controlled economy of a man who understood panic as a thing to be contained, not judged. Which bin? Victor asked. The man pointed. Victor opened it only wide enough to reach in, found the pouch, handed it down, and pushed the bin shut before anyone else could think the overhead compartments were negotiable. Now sit, Victor said. Not harsh, final. The man sat. Nadine caught Victor's eye for half a second. No thanks passed between them. There was no time for thanks. Behind row 6, someone muttered, Are we really relying on the man from 6A? It was Walter Keene. His voice was quieter now, but no warmer. The cabin heard him anyway. Grace Holloway, who had been silent through most of the flight, turned in her seat. She was 52, silver streaks in her brown hair, a wool scarf folded neatly at her throat, the kind of woman people mistook for gentle because she did not waste motion. "You were ready to rely on a suit before the suit said he knew nothing," she said. Walter looked at her. His mouth opened, but no answer came out clean enough to survive the room. No one clapped. The sentence simply stayed there like a mirror. Nadine heard it and felt heat rise behind her collar. She kept moving, but something inside her had shifted. She had asked Walter first. She had done it before she knew she had done it. That was the worst part. Not hatred, not intention. Habit. Habit wearing a professional smile. The aircraft dipped, a long, slow sinking motion that pulled a gasp from half the cabin. Nadine grabbed the top of a seat, waited for the floor to become floor again, then straightened. "Stay seated," she said. "Seat belts tight." A man near the window looked up at her with wet eyes. "Are we going to crash?" The word moved through the cabin like spilled ink. Nadine could have corrected him with polished language. She could have hidden behind phrases written by committees. Instead, she thought of Marcus in the cockpit, saying they had no time to decide what help was supposed to look like. She looked at the man and gave him the only answer that might keep him alive. "We are going to land. It may be ugly. Your job is to survive the ugly part." The interphone buzzed in her hand. She lifted it so fast the cord snapped tight. "Nadine." Marcus's voice came through behind static and warning tones, low and controlled. "Prepare them early." She turned toward the cockpit door as if he could see her. "How early?" A pause, not hesitation, calculation. Early enough that fear has no time to make decisions. Nadine closed her eyes once. When she opened them, she focused on the only thing left to do. She lifted the handset again. "Cabin crew, final checks. Passengers, listen to my voice." Nothing my voice. The descent began like a surrender no one wanted to name. Northern Crown Flight 418 dropped through the cloud layer over Lake Superior, and the world outside the windshield turned into moving gray. Snow came sideways, not falling so much as attacking the glass. The wipers fought it in hard, fast arcs. Beyond them, Thunder Bay appeared in pieces, a scatter of amber lights, then nothing, then a thin runway glow swallowed again by low cloud. First Officer Owen Fraser leaned forward in his seat, shoulders tight, both hands locked around the controls as if grip alone could hold the airplane together. Marcus stood just behind his right shoulder, one hand braced above the center console, eyes moving from attitude to airspeed to descent rate to hydraulic pressure. Nothing stayed still. That was the cruelty of it. The numbers lived just long enough to be believed, then shifted. "Northern Crown 418, the tower said, "calm through static, wind 290 at 32, gusting 40. Runway 25 available. Emergency vehicles are staged. Braking action reported reduced by ground crew." Owen's jaw flexed, reduced braking. Of course, Marcus did not look away from the panel. "We will deal with the runway when we get to the runway." "That is not comforting. It is not meant to comfort you." The aircraft yawed left. Owen corrected right. Nothing happened. He corrected again. The jet answered late, then rolled harder than he wanted. "Stop chasing it," Marcus said. Owen snapped, "It is not responding. It is responding late. Wait for the answer before you ask again." Owen's breathing came faster now. Too fast. Every instinct in him wanted movement. Push, pull, fix, anything but wait. Marcus knew that trap. Fear hated stillness. Fear mistook motion for control. "Small left correction," Marcus said. "Small." Owen moved the control a fraction. The aircraft hung there, stubborn, heavy, silent. Then it came back towards center, with a slow groan that seemed to move through the floor into Marcus's bones. "There," Marcus said. That was the answer. Owen's eyes flicked to the airspeed. "We are fast. A little. And high. A little. That is two problems. No. That is one airplane." Owen almost laughed, but it broke before it became sound. Behind them, Dr. Lena Morrison kept one hand on Captain Harold Mercer's wrist and one hand against the sidewall to steady herself. The captain's eyes were open, fixed on the windshield. He could hear every word. He could see the young man in his right seat beginning to fracture and the stranger behind him holding the pieces in place with voice alone. The military escort came through the radio again, lower now, farther off their right side. "Northern Crown 418, escort will break away before final approach." Fluid trail still visible near left main gear area. No visible flame. Owen swallowed. No visible flame, he repeated. That is the good news, Marcus said. Take the good news when it arrives. A minute earlier, Marcus had leaned toward the radio just long enough to identify himself to the escort. Former CF-18, call sign Raven, assisting from the cockpit. The escort pilot's voice returned, different now, less procedural. Raven, we have you in sight. Bring them down. For one breath, the cockpit changed. Owen turned his head just enough to look at Marcus, not at the hoodie, not at the old parka, not at the passenger from 6A, at Raven, a man with a name that belonged in radios and winter skies. Marcus did not look back, eyes forward. Owen obeyed. The runway lights appeared again, faint and narrow, a trembling line through snow. 10 seconds, Marcus said. Speed, attitude, descent. That is your whole world. Owen repeated it under his breath, as if the words were something he could tie around his wrist. Speed, attitude, descent. Again, speed, attitude, descent. Good. You are not thinking about 184 passengers right now. You are flying the next 10 seconds. The aircraft dropped suddenly, a heavy sink that pulled Lena's shoulder into the wall and made a warning tone flare. Owen pushed the throttles forward too much. Marcus caught it instantly. Not a shove. Owen eased back. The engine settled into a lower, deeper roar. Gear soon, Owen said. His voice had gone thin. On my call. Marcus watched the speed bleed slowly, watched the runway smear in and out beyond the windshield, watched the hydraulic gauge tremble near a place he did not like. Now, gear down. Owen reached for the lever and pulled it. Beneath them, metal moved through the belly of the aircraft. A deep mechanical thud rolled under the floor. One green light appeared, then the second. The third stayed dark. Owen stared at it. Left main is not green. No one spoke. Even the alarms seemed to step back and listen. For a few seconds, the cockpit forgot how to breathe. 2 green lights glowed on the landing gear panel. Nose gear. Right main. The third space stayed dark. Owen Fraser stared at it as if staring hard enough could force electricity through the bulb. Left gear did not lock, he whispered. The words had no volume, but they filled the cockpit anyway. Dr. Lena Morrison looked up from Captain Mercer. Mercer's eyes widened, sharp and furious, not with fear alone, but with the agony of understanding everything and controlling nothing. Marcus did not let Owen's sentence become a verdict. Hold speed, he said. Do not pull. Do not start inventing. Owen's hands tightened. We need to go around. No, if the left main is not locked, we cannot land. If we go around and lose more pressure, we may not get another approach. Owen's face went pale in patches. The runway lights appeared again through the snow. Closer now, a narrow white path laid across black earth and wet ice. The aircraft drifted right under the crosswind. Owen corrected. Too much. Marcus caught it. Small, let her answer. The plane hesitated, then came back, late and heavy. Gear pressure, Marcus asked. Owen checked, blinking too fast. Low but holding. Vibration? I felt movement. I heard the drop. Then wait, Marcus, wait. That word became the whole cockpit. Wait while the snow struck the windshield. Wait while the runway grew. Wait while the warning tones pressed against every nerve. Dr. Lena kept her fingers on the captain's wrist, but her eyes stayed on the blank light. Captain Mercer's working hand twitched once against the harness. A tear slid from the outer corner of his eye into his gray temple. Not surrender, rage. The kind a captain feels when his aircraft needs him and his body refuses to report for duty. Then the third light blinked once. Gone. Owen sucked in air. It blinked again. This time it stayed. Green, left main locked. No one cheered. The ground was already coming for them. Gear 3 green, Owen said, voice breaking around the relief. Marcus did not give him time to live there. Runway, speed. Owen's eyes snapped forward. They were fast, not wildly. Enough. The wind pushed the nose left, then shoved the tail. The aircraft came in crabbed, heavy, wounded, still listening but slower now, like each command had to travel through water before reaching metal. I am going to flare, Owen said. Not yet. We are low. Not yet. The runway filled the windshield. Snow streaked under the landing lights. Red emergency vehicles raced along the side, lights flashing through the storm like warning blood. Marcus, hold, runway, hold. The cockpit had narrowed to Marcus's voice, Owen's hands, and a strip of concrete rushing up too fast. Now, Marcus said. Owen eased back. Not a yank, not panic. A controlled breath through the controls. The main gear hit with a brutal metallic scream. The aircraft bounced. For one instant they were flying again, too low to fly and too high to stop. Owen reacted from the oldest place in his body and pulled. Marcus snapped, "Let it settle." Owen forced his hands down by inches. The second impact slammed through the aircraft like a hammer into bone. In the cabin, bodies lurched against belts, overhead bins burst open. A laptop bag struck the aisle. Someone cried out. Nadine's voice tore through the cabin, raw and commanding. "Stay down." On the runway, the aircraft skidded left. Owen fought it. "We are off-center. Rudder gentle. Brakes are weak. Reverse what you have. Keep her straight." The engines roared backward, uneven and angry. Snow and spray exploded past the windows. The left side dipped just enough for Owen's breath to catch. Marcus saw the fear before it became motion. "Do not overcorrect. She is pulling." "I know." Small right, hold. The end of the runway lights seemed too close, then closer. Marcus's hand gripped the back of Owen's seat. For the first time, his voice dropped below command, almost into prayer. "Stay with us." The aircraft shuddered, slowed, slid again. The brakes groaned beneath them, hot and wounded. Fire trucks paralleled them in the storm. Then, with one last violent lurch, Northern Crown Flight 41 stopped. No one spoke. Not Owen, not Lena, not the passengers still folded over themselves, waiting for the impact that never came. 4 seconds passed before anyone believed it. They were on the ground, alive. But outside, smoke began to curl near the landing gear, thin and gray against the snow, and a voice from emergency response came through the radio. "Flight 418, hold position. Possible brake overheat and fluid leak. Prepare for evacuation on command." The evacuation order came 3 minutes after the aircraft stopped, though it felt much longer. Passengers stayed folded in brace position, heads down, hands locked, breathing against their knees, waiting for the next impact that never arrived. Outside, emergency lights swept red and blue across the snow. Inside, the cabin smelled of hot brakes, spilled coffee, damp wool, and fear that had not yet learned it was allowed to leave. Nadine Clark lifted her head first from the forward jump seat. Her hair had pulled loose from its bun. One shoulder burned from where the landing had thrown her against the harness. She tasted blood at the corner of her mouth, bit down and stood anyway. The interphone crackled. "Forward left available. Evacuate immediately. Leave all personal items." Nadine closed her eyes for half a breath. Then the training took over, not polished, not pretty, necessary. "Evacuate," she shouted, voice rough but cutting clean through the cabin. "Leave everything. Move now." Seatbelts snapped open in a wave. People rose too fast, bumped shoulders, reached upward by instinct. A man in business class grabbed for the overhead bin before the woman beside him had even stood. Nadine saw the motion and moved toward him. Victor Shaw got there first. His hand closed around the man's wrist, not violently, but with enough force to stop the world inside that small decision. "Let go," Victor said. The man stared at him, stunned and offended. "Even here, even now. My laptop is in there." Victor's eyes did not soften. "Your bag is not worth someone else's life." The man looked toward the open door, towards the slide, toward the snow whipping past the fuselage, and something human finally broke through the habit of ownership. He let go. Nadine pointed him forward. "Jump and slide, move away at the bottom." One by one, passengers vanished into the storm. Some screamed when the cold hit them. Some cursed from shock. Some landed hard and crawled before firefighters pulled them upright. Grace Holloway helped an older woman whose knees had locked beneath her. "Lean on me," Grace said. "Do not look back." Walter Keene stood in the aisle, not moving. The cashmere coat, the silver watch, the polished shoes, all the small armor of status had lost its meaning. His face had gone gray. He looked toward the cockpit door as if seeing it for the first time. The man he had doubted was still inside. The man from 6A. The man who had been asked to prove himself while the rest of them judged from soft leather seats. Nadine caught Walter by the sleeve. "Move, Mr. Keene." He blinked at her. "He is still up there." Nadine's jaw tightened. "Then honor that by getting out of his way." Walter moved. Outside, snow struck faces like thrown sand. Emergency crews shouted through the wind. Passengers stumbled across the slick ground under the flashing lights, wrapped in fear and thin airplane clothing, alive but not yet steady enough to believe it. Inside the cockpit, Marcus helped Dr. Lena Morrison prepare Captain Harold Mercer for removal. The captain's working hand gripped Marcus's wrist once. Weak, furious, grateful. Marcus leaned closer. "You got help here, Captain. Now let them carry you." Mercer's eyes shone. He could not answer, but he released his grip. Owen Fraser still sat in the right seat. His hands remained on the controls, white and fixed, as if the aircraft might start moving again if he let go. The engines had powered down. The runway was still. The fight was over. His body had not received the message. Marcus placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Owen, nothing. Owen, it is over." Owen's eyes stayed forward. "I bounced it." His voice was small, almost ashamed to exist. "We nearly went off center. We did not. I almost lost them." Marcus waited until Owen turned, just enough to hear him instead of the memory. "You lost pieces of the airplane," Marcus said. "Then you kept flying what was left." Owen's face collapsed around the eyes. Not loud, not dramatic, just a young man finally setting down a weight he had carried since the first warning light. He opened his fingers one at a time. The yoke stayed still. Marcus gave him a short nod. "Now get up. Survivors need to walk out too." Owen stood on legs that did not trust the floor. At the cockpit door, Nadine looked back once. Marcus was still there, helping Lena guide the stretcher team toward the captain. Snow blew through the open forward door. Red light crossed Marcus's face, then vanished. In the cabin, empty seats leaned crooked, bags lay scattered. A paperback rested open in the aisle, pages bent from impact. Proof of ordinary lives interrupted and returned. Passengers outside were beginning to understand. Not fully, not yet, but enough. The man they had doubted had stayed until the last possible moment. And Marcus Reed, who had helped bring them back to Earth, had still not called his mother. The temporary holding area inside Thunder Bay International looked nothing like an airport lounge anymore. It looked like the aftermath of a storm that had learned everyone's name. Passengers sat under silver emergency blankets, their shoes wet, their hair flattened by snow, their hands wrapped around paper cups of coffee they were too shaken to drink. Some spoke into phones with voices that kept breaking. Some cried openly. Some stared at the floor as if the carpet held the answer to why they were still alive. Marcus Reed stood near a tall window overlooking the runway. Outside, Northern Crown Flight 418 sat surrounded by emergency vehicles, its white fuselage streaked with slush, its landing gear lit by harsh floodlights. It did not look heroic. It looked damaged. So did most of the people inside the terminal. Marcus held his phone but had not unlocked it. His mother's name waited in the dark glass. Mom. 4 letters that suddenly felt harder to face than a failing hydraulic system. Behind him, Nadine Clark approached slowly. For once, her uniform did not protect her. Her hair was loose now, her sleeve torn near the cuff, one shoulder held lower than the other from the landing. She stopped a few feet away and said nothing. Marcus saw her reflection in the glass before he turned. She took a breath, lost it, tried again. "I looked past you." Marcus did not answer. Nadine nodded as if she deserved the silence. "Not because you were silent. Not because you were unqualified. Because I thought help had to look a certain way." The words came out plain. No polish, no company language. That mattered. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He could have made it easier for her. People often wanted that from the ones they had wronged. A quick smile. A clean forgiveness. Permission to stop feeling uncomfortable. Marcus did not give her cruelty. He did not give her release either. "Next time," he said, "look at the person before you look at the picture in your head." Nadine's eyes filled, but she did not let the tears fall. "I will put it in my report. Put all of it in. I will." Across the room, Grace Holloway spoke with 2 investigators near a folding table. Her emergency blanket hung around her shoulders like a dull cape. She pointed once toward Marcus, then toward Walter Keene, then toward the aisle of memory no one else could see. Victor Shaw stood beside her, arms crossed, face stern, confirming what he had seen. Marcus had been challenged harder, doubted faster, and forced to prove what others had only been invited to imply. No one shouted. No one demanded revenge. The truth was being recorded, and a system was being forced to look at itself. Walter Keene came to Marcus after the investigators left him alone. He looked smaller without the cabin around him, without his seat, without the soft authority of first class. His cashmere coat had a wet stain near the sleeve. His silver watch still flashed under the lights, but it no longer seemed to announce anything. "Mr. Reed," he began, then stopped. Marcus waited. Walter swallowed. "I wanted to say," his voice failed at the safe part. Marcus held his gaze. "Say it clearly." Walter's face tightened. Not with offense this time, with effort. "I judged you before I knew you." Marcus nodded once. "Remember how fast you did it." Walter looked down, and for once he did not seem to be searching for an answer, just carrying the one he had earned. When he walked away, Marcus finally unlocked his phone. His thumb hovered over his mother's name. He imagined the porch light in Calgary, the yellow circle on the snow, Ruth Reed sitting in her robe, pretending not to worry because worry had followed her son for too many years. He called. She answered on the fourth ring. "Marcus?" He closed his eyes. The whole night moved through him at once. The captain's broken voice, dark thoyape of the escort jet, Owen's shaking hands, the runway rushing up through snow. "I am here, Mom." She said nothing for a second. She heard what mothers hear beneath words. "What happened?" "The flight had trouble," he said. "I helped. I am safe." Ruth breathed out, and it sounded like someone setting down a heavy bowl without dropping it. "Then come home slow," she said. "I do not need you brave. I need you alive." The next morning, after giving his statement and being cleared to travel, Marcus boarded another flight to Calgary. Same gray hoodie, same old parka, same canvas backpack, no medals, no uniform, no announcement. Nadine was not working that flight. She stood near the gate after her own debrief, waiting only long enough to see him board. When Marcus reached the jet bridge entrance, she looked at his face first. Not his clothes, not his boots, him. Marcus noticed. He gave her a small nod and moved toward his seat by the window. Outside, Canada lay white beneath the morning sun. Inside, a man who had been mistaken for nobody sat down quietly, carrying wounds no one could see and a lesson some of them would never forget. Sometimes the person who can save you does not arrive with medals, titles, or polished shoes. Sometimes he sits by the window in an old hoodie, carrying wounds you cannot see. Judge him too quickly, and you may miss the one person who could bring you home. If this story made you think twice before judging someone, hit like and subscribe for more. Which moment stayed with you the most? And where are you watching from?